So we're at Wednesday on Holy Week, Scott, and each day kind of going over the events, the pattern that leads to Friday, and then only then, Easter. And I was thinking about that, and I think, frankly, Wednesday for me is the most difficult of all the days. Not as you would imagine it be, the trial, and not the execution, but Wednesday. Because it's Wednesday when we look specifically at Matthew and we read where Jesus is handed over, but only because a bargain is made between Judas and the religious authority. And it's extraordinary when you think about it, that the greatest moment of faith stems because of this illicit bargain between two parties. It shouldn't have even occurred, and then that it occurs and it resolves as only God can do in redeeming all things. What still is surprising to me is even that it would continue to occur. In other words, Judas and the Sanhedrin make a deal. Immediately following that, then Judas has to go and sit at the same, like we are sitting at a table here, and be face to face, eye to eye with the one that he is to betray. And I can't even imagine how you could do that.
First of all, are you calling me Judas, Greg?
Well, some things speak for themselves.
So there's something that was striking to me in reading these passages, in that not only is Jesus handed over for what amounted to 30 pieces of silver, which was an amount for a slave, but throughout this passage, even Peter is at that same table, and it had me thinking about this idea of regret. You see these disciples at the table, their actions are divergent after Jesus is arrested, and you see Peter, who Jesus proclaims will deny him 3 times, and Judas, he calls him friend, but really in an imposter way. And you see divergent actions between Peter and Judas. Peter is, as you say, redeemed, and Judas goes on to hang himself. And wondering what, for those who, I think we all can agree, we betray Jesus in some regard, we're all sinful people, how do those who are thinking of or having or harboring regret out there in the internet verse, how do we get over that? How do we take the route of Peter instead of Judas and find that hope that Jesus offers?
Well, I think it's in the interpretation of the experience. I still remember a line, still one of my favorites. It's from Emily Dickinson, and she writes, "After a death, a formal feeling comes." I think, and who knows for sure, but for Judas, when he handed over Jesus for the silver, there was already a death. It was already done. And therefore, it wasn't so much that Judas was going to a meal with Jesus, but he was simply consecrating a decision. For him, Jesus was already dead. He was already gone. And therefore, he was just playing out the rest of it, which I think sometimes we forget. In the decisions that we make, it's that moment of decision, not the actual event, that is most important. Once we decide about someone, we change the entire way we relate to them. Ever give up on a relationship? All of the formality of not caring afterwards really stems from the moment before. And so I think what happened for Jesus and Judas was that Judas had already decided, and there was nothing that was going to be said at that table, and there's nothing else that could have been done, because already a bargain had been made. Which reminds us, if we're going to ever be open to what God can do, we can't make up our mind about how far that can extend. Because if we've already made up our mind, then it's going to be hard for the Spirit to break through. And one of the things that I think is most striking is it was actually right before the meal, and it was in the negotiation between Judas and Sanhedrin, in which the die was cast, and in fact the deed was done. And the rest of it was just the momentum of that earlier decision. And I think the same for us.
I wonder, when you speak of the deed already being done, I think it makes sense that a piece of Judas had already died in the decision that he made. I know you and Susan were talking about whether he really needed to do that or wanted to do that, or if he kind of felt like the momentum had carried him into that decision and he had felt like he had no other choice. I know some chapters later, it's really profound to me in the distinction between the two, where Jesus asks Peter a simple question when they reunite, and he says, "Peter, do you love me?" And how, for those who maybe feel too far gone from God, and this is a time when they're reflecting on that relationship, how might they find love for God again? What steps can they take?
Well, the nice thing I think about Christian faith and about what Jesus was doing with Peter, and you asked me earlier, so the difference between Judas and Peter, well, maybe it is because Judas made a conscious decision and then followed through with it. In fact, the betrayal of Peter was not of commission but omission. It wasn't to say, I am against, but it was to say, I don't know. And what Jesus does when he sees when he sees Peter in the resurrection, is he gives him a chance to declare what he believes rather than deny what he doesn't know. And so I think that's the quality of difference, is that Christian faith provides for us an assent. It isn't simply to just go along and get along, but we believe. And what we believe needs to be acted on, and what we believe has consequences. The consequence of Judas and the decision that he made was to his death. The promise of Easter is that when Peter, late in the game, even after denial, was still given an opportunity to say, now what is it that you really believe? Easter is a chance not for us to observe a celebration, but it's to assent to a proposition that God redeems everyone and everything, and there is no escape from that possibility.